It is an incredibly mysterious and confusing world we live in when there are no God-given rules or laws to follow, and when there is so much suffering and pain and chaos prevalent in the world. When we are just born into the world descending from perhaps billions or even trillions of ancestors, we can ask ourselves, what is the meaning of this world, or why are we here? When there are no guidelines to follow and no instructions to follow, then it becomes a bit difficult to navigate through life. And sometimes, as a response to certain environmental occurrences, people commit certain actions. Why does the government exist? Does it not exist in order to create order and harmony between civilians? The authors of the United States Constitution had been victims of oppression and tyranny, so after they had escaped from that world, the government that had violated their natural rights, they decided to work together to constitute a nation that would be beautiful, a nation where all the subjects of the nation could prosper and have a chance at finding happiness and joy and liberty and justice. The authors of the U.S. Constitution, as they wrote words into a parchment, dreamt of a place where life would be beautiful and wonderful rather than hellish and full of turmoil and victimization and tyranny. And yet, today in this world, as the Constitution is still in play, as our government still bends according to it, there is war, there is famine, there is widespread poverty. Yet today, people still live under tyranny and oppression in the United States and all across the world as well. Violence and hatred are widespread all across the various nations, including the United States. However beautiful the Constitution may have been, and however beautiful the intentions of its authors may have been, the dream of liberty and justice and prosperity for all has become but a dream, but a wish unfulfilled. The Constitution has not yielded the results that the authors had hoped that it would yield, and quite the contrary, the world and the nation and the people are now more than ever clouded with hatred, bloodshed, violence, oppression, and fascism. Was the Constitution not founded with a massacre? Did not the Constitution, apart from the multitude of words that describe the utopia, allow slavery? Does not the Constitution still allow slavery and slaughter? When the Europeans discovered North America, shortly thereafter, Native Americans were massacred. They and their ways were considered savage, and so the European migrants commanded that the natives adopt a new way of living that was identical to the migrants' way of living. And when those who did not wish to do so rebelled, they were massacred. It seems quite predictable that a government that was founded by a holocaust of innocent people who did not wish to be controlled would become a tyrannical government. It also seems quite ironic that a constitution that was created to prevent tyranny, fascism, oppression, would allow for the extreme enslavement of African American people. African Americans were lashed, stolen from their mothers, deprived of their natural rights, and sometimes even massacred. And this was allowed by the Constitution. Women were seen as inferior to men, and thus were treated as inferiors. For a long time, women were not allowed to do things such as vote on important matters. It is quite evident to me that by history alone, the Constitution is not living up to the expectations the authors had for it. Or perhaps it is living up to those expectations. The authors of the Constitution wanted a nation void of tyranny and oppression, and yet some of the authors were tyrants themselves. Thomas Jefferson, for example, although he spoke out against tyranny, personally contributed with his words and actions to the perpetuation of slavery, slaughter, and oppression. He owned hundreds of slaves. He allowed for the massacring of Native Americans. So although the Constitution was good in that it was purposed for preventing victimization, it was vastly and majorly flawed with the author's attitudes of apathy and indifference for the well-being of others. This is why it is an elitist document, a system of government that, along with its themes of violence and indifference, belongs in the past. A democracy is a system of government in which all of the eligible members of that society have a say in important matters. So by this definition, the Constitution was democratic, but it was only the ones who were not eligible members who were being victimized by the tyranny of this new government. It has always been others who were unworthy of liberty and justice and prosperity. It was human Caucasian males who authored the Constitution, who founded the United States government, with their ideals and principles that were tainted with delusions of their own supremacy over others. Those who were not male were seen as inferior and less worthy of the blessings of the world. Those who were not Caucasian were seen as inferior and less worthy of the blessings of the world. And those who were not human were seen as inferior and less worthy of the blessings of the world. This supremacy complex led to the Constitution allowing for the victimization of African Americans, women, Native Americans, people of races other than white, and non-human animals. And today, as there is much controversy over whether or not individuals of ethnicities and races other than American or white, and whether or not female individuals are receiving their due equality, there is an atrocious Holocaust taking place. As human beings cannot even agree to treating each other with respect, there is an underlying system of needless mass violation, needless mass incarceration, needless mass physical and psychological torture, and needless mass slaughter. In facilities isolated from the rest of society, there are non-human animals who are being deprived of their natural rights, and their sufferings are ignored by the vast majority of us, just as the sufferings of Native Americans, African Americans, and women were ignored by the vast majority of the oppressors. In cages, boxes, and crates, non-human animals all across the world and all across the nation are often being deprived of things such as sunlight and grass, are being confined into small spaces where they can barely turn around or carry out natural behaviors. We subject them to things we would not subject even the worst human beings to. Pigs get gassed to death with carbon dioxide, and this process burns their eyes, nostrils, lungs, and throats, and they spend about half a minute screaming in agony and thrashing violently in pain. Sometimes they thrash so much that their hooves snap off of their legs, and this is just one example of victimization out of countless examples. The chickens before the moment of death are subjected to extreme and horrifying experiences of torture and anguish. So are the cows. So are the ducks who are raised for our flesh-eating habits. So are the minks, rabbits, and foxes for our fur-wearing habits. So are the chimps, dogs, and cats who are tested on in biomedical and vivisection laboratories. And so on. We treat innocent, helpless creatures worse than child molesters and rapists and serial killers. But it is all allowed by the Constitution. The victimization of non-human animals is constitutional. The systematic oppression and abuse of non-human animals is constitutional. And all of this violence and abuse does not just impact the lives of the non-human animals. It affects all of us, whether we like it or not. This normalized system of violence that we have set up against the non-human animals of the world takes just as much of a toll on our lives as it does on the lives of the non-human animals. When we persuade ourselves and each other that the sufferings of victimized individuals is insignificant and inconsequential, we come to develop a mindset that it is okay to abuse each other as well. And so we begin believing that the sufferings of victimized individuals, whether they be human or non-human animals, is insignificant and inconsequential. As Dr. Alex Hershaft, a survivor of Warsaw Ghetto, said, "Abusing non-human animals is the gateway drug to abusing other humans." So it is. Racism, sexism, and homophobia are forms of prejudice and hate that do not come naturally to children. They are behaviors that are learned from their parents. Speciesism is the root of all of these forms of discrimination, that some lives matter less, that those who are different, who look differently, and communicate differently, somehow have less of a right to be free from harm. And as societies continue to hold these beliefs, they grow more violent towards those who are different, and even towards each other. And now on this day, the normalized and systematic extreme abuse of non-human animals has built a reality where violence and fascism is acceptable. Perhaps we look upon fascism in other countries and condemn it, saying, "Look how that government reigns tyranny over their citizens." But with a country such as North Korea held in comparison to us, how different is that place from this place, the United States? Just as we do, they systematically abuse non-human animals. Just as we do, they systematically abuse each other. The government of North Korea psychologically imprisons and enslaves their citizens, and so does the government of the United States. Both societies live in a world of incessant promulgations of propaganda. Both peoples are systematically manipulated and controlled and lied to. Here in the United States, from the moment we are born, we are deprived of our free will. At a ripe age after birth, we are sent off to a facility, and there we have our freedom of thought and freedom of will stolen from us. In the words of Ivan Illich, school is the advertising agency which makes you believe that you need the society as it is. There we are taught what to think and what to do, and as we progress through the levels of these facilities, we are systematically brainwashed by the propaganda of the world that we are fed, the stories of the world that we are told, and the traditional attitudes and dogmas of the people of the world whom we encounter. As children, we are taught that intelligence is the ability to remember and repeat, that accurate memory and repetition are rewarded, that non-compliance is punished, to conform intellectually and socially, and that truth comes from authority. Those who are in power, a minority of extremely pecunious individuals, own us, the majority, tyrannically and with deceit in order to remain powerful. They own planet land. They make money off of us, and they make money off of the planet. They want our obedience so that they can effectively usurp large amounts of power from the human collective. Go to school, get a job, join the military, listen to the radio, watch television, believe in this, believe in that, buy more, consume, obey. How different really is this society from that of the North Korean society? People starve in one place while, in another place, people have abundance in food. People are forced into behaving like everyone else and into believing in the dogmas. Given, there are major differences between these two countries, but in both, there is a prevailing system of governmental manipulation and control of the citizens. I mean, for goodness sake, our government dropped 2 atomic bombs on tens of thousands of innocent people, and they have managed to persuade the majority of us into thinking such violence is acceptable. In this country, we are constantly fed a narrative that communists are the bad guys and that we are the good guys. Over there, they are constantly fed a narrative that Americans are the bad guys and that North Koreans are the good guys. Here, we tell ourselves that we are free and that the denizens of North Korea are prisoners and victims, when truly, our society and theirs are both being subjected to tyrannical and manipulative and deceptive governments who use us in order to gain more power. And for as long as we continue to convince ourselves that we are free when we are obviously psychologically imprisoned and enslaved, dystopia will continue. Things like war and violence and hatred will continue to be deemed natural and normal by us. Many of the sentences within the United States Constitution are without a doubt beautiful, and many of the ideals and principles that we and our government wish and claim to hold are indeed beautiful. But somewhere along the road in quest to utopia and societal harmony, we have lost the way. Somewhere along the way, we accidentally drifted down a thorny side path that consisted of the slaughter of millions of human beings whom we deem Native Americans, the slaughter and exploitation of millions of human beings whom we deem African Americans, and the slaughter and oppression of so many more individuals who were considered different. The side path consisted of the violation and exploitation of non-human animals for completely trivial reasons, and of various attitudes such as apathy to the misery of others. As the words of the Constitution were being written, the dream the authors ingenuously held in their hearts sadly became corrupted. It had created a new government, and sadly, violence and fascism became a part of the government. And as time passed, and as people continued to reap what they sowed, we now live in a society where many people still cannot respect the right to equality of women and men of other ethnicities and races, and where many people still cannot respect the natural right to life and liberty and freedom from harm of non-human animals. This is the type of society we have become. It is not one of liberty and justice. Sadly, this is a government and people who reign terror over others and each other.